All right, we'll just give people, sorry for the technical difficulties, everybody. We're just going to give people a couple of minutes to rejoin here. And Adam, why don't I turn it over to you to get started?
Yeah, thanks, Joanne. Can you hear me okay now, Brent?
Yep, I can hear you.
Yeah, no problem. And I apologise for everyone jumping back on, just a technical glitch. But hey, we're live. We can blame being me in Texas and you in Sydney. Maybe I'm a long way from you, Brent. So maybe that's the problem.
Maybe.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So yeah, I'm really excited to have you on this call. It's only 25 minutes or so now, but I think it'll be plenty of time for us to really go through this case study. And the reason I'm excited about this one is it's not a typical in-depth case study, but we've been talking about it for a little while, and I love the impact that it had on yourself as a therapist, but also the patient as well, and the reaction to the patient, as well as the ripple effect, I guess, from some of the other allied health professionals that he was involved with. So what I'm going to do is get you to introduce just a little bit about this case study, and then we'll share some of the information on mysozo.com that we've got, and then kind of step through some of the things that you did for this particular patient. So this one is very much focused on body composition. We'll look at some of the key sort of outputs that we normally use. We're keen to find out, what sort of information you passed on to the patient and things like that. So do you just kind of introduce, the patient that we're talking about today, Brent? That'd be great.
Okay. So he first presented to me a few years back. He was originally a 69-year-old gentleman who was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. That was his initial cancer diagnosis. He then was told he was in remission, and it came back. And second time round, came back with a vengeance. So he had surgery, chemo, and radiotherapy. And he came in to see me post-treatment quite a while after treatment had finished. He ended up with what he was sent to me for wasn't for any of the cancer or anything else. He happened to see an endocrinologist who was monitoring his osteoporosis, and he had compression fractions throughout his thoracic spine. And the previous medical team that he had, obviously they didn't mean it, but the way he interpreted it was that he was going to be at risk of fracturing no matter what he did. And he wasn't able to go on to any medication like Collier to help sort of slow down the reabsorption of bone. And so he gave up work. He was an old school printer. So, not the digital printer, picking up big, die casts and things like that. And in his mind was anytime he bent forward, he would fracture. So he went through how many years before he saw us, thinking that he was just going to break no matter what he did. So he'd lost a further 8 kilos and he wasn't big anyway. So he lost a further 8 kilos since he was told about the fractures. So he was just too scared to move. So by the time he came in and we had to give him there was just almost no way to get him confident. And then I happened to meet with Adam, and they were nice enough to lend us a SOZO for a charity event. And I thought, well, bugger this, we're gonna use it for Kev. And we actually showed that let's take a little bit of control of your own health, and let's do a little bit of just very gentle strength training to start with. And he actually saw that for the first time that he'd ever had a scan done related to his cancer, that he was actually going better. So you can see when Adam goes through the graphs later, you'll be able to see from the graph itself where he turned the corner.
Yeah, I guess my first question, before we look at some of the data, is this a unique case in terms of his history and what you've heard, or is that something that you come across on a regular basis? To me, it's an interesting one because of kind of what his interpretation was from other healthcare professionals.
Unfortunately, it's not overly rare. I've been doing this for over 20 years. I suppose 2016 was finally when we got some recognition in Australia for exercise oncology. So before that, nearly all of our patients came in 5-10 years post-treatment with other complications rather than coming in for their cancer treatment. So, but I think the rare thing in this case was just how scared he was of moving, and basically gave up life because he was so worried that he was going to refracture.
Sure. Yeah, so we're just seeing on screen now, this is one of the first scans that we did, back in January 2020. And typically when we talk about body composition, we look at, 4 or 5 key parameters. So for those who have used our technology before, or those haven't, the body composition information gives you a whole range of things to look at. But I guess the skill is trying to determine, what's happening from Brent's perspective as an exercise physiologist, and then also how do we deliver that information to the patient and try and make sure that resonates with them and has an impact. So you can see.
So
Brent,
Adam, hey, do you mind if I interject with one thing? Yeah.
Go for it.
So for everyone watching, if you're in front of your computer and open My SOZO, open a patient and follow along. That might help kind of relate the information Adam and Brent are going through to one of your patients. Just a thought.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Joanne. So yeah, so you can see here, this is the first scan with this particular patient. So when I look at this data at first glance, if I didn't know the history of this particular patient that Brent has described, we look at total body water, for a male, he's actually in a pretty good level of overall fluid. One of the advantages of our device is we can then dig a little bit deeper. So I always kind of say, hey, I need to know how much fluid you have when I'm talking to a patient, but also where that fluid is. So how much inside your cell and how much outside your cell. And interestingly, on the first scan, Brent, he has a lot of extracellular fluid, going on from this initial scan. So he has more extracellular fluid than intracellular fluid, which is interesting. So that's the first thing I'm trying to look at. Ideally, we want, the extracellular fluid to be somewhere around about this mean, which is for his, age and his gender, where he typically would be. So we know most of the population should sit in this area, but he's a little way from that. Likewise, his intracellular fluid is low as well. So that's the first thing that kind of stands out. Overall fluid certainly is there. So is that because of the extracellular fluid increases that we're seeing that number, so high? So that's kind of the first thing I'm always looking at. And then really it looks at how much muscle mass this particular person has. So he has 28.8 kilos of skeletal muscle mass at about 46%. So again, at first glance, that's a pretty good overall percentage. But I think, Brent, you said, this particular patient was pretty lean, very slight already. I think his weight's around 62, 65, 69 kilos in those sort of numbers. So yeah, it's interesting that when we look at this analysis of body composition, muscle mass to fat mass, even his fat mass is in that very lean kind of area. So again, depending on the patient, that could be a really good thing. For other patients in oncology, it may not necessarily be a good thing to be at a low fat mass. So they're kind of the 5 kind of key parameters that I would generally look at. So how much fluid someone has, where is that fluid, how much muscle mass, and how much fat mass. The other interesting thing with this report, if I go down to phase angle, which is really kind of what's happening at a cellular level, how well the patient is, in terms of a phase angle can be a little bit of an insight. We see that the average for his sort of demographic should be somewhere around about that 5 or 6 level. He's starting at around about 4.1. So, without knowing any of the history that you've gone through, there are a couple of little red flags that we potentially need to look at when we go through a body composition report. Right down the bottom of this, it'll give us, 62.6 kilos, so and I think it's about 170, 180 centimeters, Brent, from memory. So, that puts him, when we talk BMI, at a pretty low level as well. So that's typically what I'm looking for when I go through every single body composition report with a patient. How much fluid they have, where is that fluid, how much muscle, how much body fat, and then things like phase angle can be useful to kind of get a bit of an idea of the cellular health. So that was his first scan, Brent, and then kind of what happened from this point on with you, with him using the SOZO and your discussions. That's what I'm really interested in.
Yeah, so around the fluid, I talked to him about how much he's drinking. He was reported, he took a diary for a week, and he was actually drinking 2.5 to 3 litres a day. And that might explain why he's got lots of fluid on board. But I sort of said to him, look, that the fluid, from what the way I was explaining to him, is you've got lots of fluid going in, but not a lot of it's going into the cell. So if we wanted to build muscle, you think of the protein as a brick in the wall, and everything else is your cement dust. Can you put cement dust on the brick and get it to stick? So the first thing we did was we started him on hydrolyte and got him to take small sips throughout the day. He found his water intake was lower, so it was down probably under 2 litres when he did it that way. But by having small little sips throughout the day, we found that he was actually just waiting till he got thirsty and then doing the old glug, 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 and found he needed to go to the toilet all the time. So just by taking it a little bit slower, and that's when we started to see things change a little bit. From in his head, then he was able to unlock the ability for his body to, and this is what the feedback he gave me. He took that consultation as, well, if I'm eating the right food and I'm drinking the right stuff, and the doctors kept telling me that I'm breaking down, I want to take that active control on building myself back up again. So it started for him with education about hydration and when he should be, having little sips around training and things like that. So I suppose he wanted to keep focusing on the muscle mass, that he thought it was good, that it was above average for his age, but he wanted to see if he could actually build it. So that was the turning point. And then as you'll see, as he goes through it, the more and more confident he got, he went from 2 very light sessions in the gym to he was up at the gym 4 times a week, and training quite hard. And the biggest thing was training without fear. And he wasn't, so he was very tight when he was training. He was worried about it, and he was flaring up things like getting neck pain and shoulder pain. It's because he was so anxious that he was going to fracture.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it brings up an interesting point. I mean, quite often the fluid is a great starting point, to get people comfortable with this type of technology. And I had an appointment today in Dallas, in Texas, and we kind of sort of expressed the same things. I mean, how do we get confidence with the patient, with the technology, and all the numbers that we're seeing, and that fluid conversation you can have with everybody. Young, old, healthy, unhealthy. It's something that needs to really be considered. So. We spoke before I kind of look at some of the other reports, the end report mainly, but even when you're talking about muscle, and in our language we talk skeletal muscle mass and fat-free mass and all these parameters. But how do you kind of deliver that, from your side, the exercise physiologist, to the patient? Is there certain ways that you kind of talk about muscle mass? What's the importance that you place on muscle mass as an exercise physiologist? Number one. I guess number two, then, how do you deliver that message to the patient so it's really clear and concise? Have you got some thoughts for everyone that's on today?
Yeah, I mean, each patient's a little bit different. But Kev, I found that if I just broke it right down and we talked about steak, and if he went to the butcher and he got that bit of steak over there, the steak might have been bigger, but it wasn't a real good quality meat. And we just talked about how can we get that quality to improve. We've got to keep it hydrated. We've got to keep it exercising. We've got to keep it stimulating. Okay, it can't just sit around. So that for him was, when I broke it down into stuff like that, that worked for him. His big thing was he'd had cancer twice, and the medication and the treatment he was on had killed his skeleton. So I said, well, you might not be able to take an active role in looking after the skeleton, as it's let you down a little bit, but the muscle works a bit better. So in my room, I've got the muscle chart up and the skeleton chart. And I said, well, how about we just look at the red side. Let's go on over and look at what the muscle can do. And let's not worry too much about the bones at the moment, because the bones can't walk around by themselves anyway. So if we can just improve what the red side of my room, and let's go from there. So the second he stopped focusing on osteoporosis, and that was when he really started to turn around and feel a little bit better.
So Brent, when you're having these conversations with the patient and you're talking about SOZO data, are you showing them the charts?
Yeah, definitely. Most definitely. So what we said off camera before, you've got to be a little bit careful of which graphs you're showing people. So I'll always have the tablet in my hand first. So I'm going through, and if, let's say, it's someone that's coming in and they're coming in for weight management or to lose fat tissue, and you see it go up, I don't show them that one. Okay, or not in the first one instance anyway. I will focus on something that is improving, and again, it usually, if their weight's gone up a little bit, but they've gained muscle and they're retaining better fluid. Okay, I'll go, well, that's 300 mils in fluid and 200 grams in muscle. That's why your weight's gone up. And again, they get confident, and over time, it'll start to track a little bit better for them. I think you've just got to, I suppose, half our degree should have been psychology. I think if we can get patients to understand it.
That's a huge part of what you do.
Yeah.
So you go through the tablet, select which pieces you want to show them, and then use the tablet to present it to the patient.
Yeah, definitely. So the tablet, then I'll quite often I'll put it up on my big screen on the computer, because they see the graph in a bigger thing if there's been an example. And I'll quite often print some of the reports off if it's working in their favor, and give it to them a hard copy. And I say, look, I'm going to send this to your doctor anyway. I'm going to send it to your other allied health. But it's good to hang this on the wall, buddy. Get in, take it to your doctor, and they all come about. They just get this big smile on their face at their graph, or like you see Kevin's on the screen. It looks like it's starting to tick. And that to me, walking out with that bit of paper in his hand, I think he was really proud. Like, age-wise, 69. He was much more happy when I gave him a hard black and white copy on paper than he was looking at screens.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. And I mean, I'm just showing one of these graphs. It's interesting because, when we look at the skeletal muscle mass, there is a little bit of drop off, but I think this particular point here from here, and we've talked about this for a little while, Brent, yes, you're trying to educate him, get him confident, getting moving, talking about fluid. So there's a process of change that almost he has to go through in his mind to say, hey, I actually can do some exercise. Mm-hmm. And we would look at this and go, well, actually losing a little bit of muscle mass, but that's all part of your education and the time that it took to get this to happen. But from this point here to the next one is not a huge increase in when I look at it, but it was critical for him to get buy-in to say, hey, I can actually start to do what Brent's telling me. So I kind of always said it's the power of one number. What's that one number that's going to really make a difference and an impact, for your patient, and that's on the skeletal muscle mass side. So I just thought that was, really great to hear what you just said, but it's unique in terms of looking at some of this information a little bit differently, because we can get a lot of information to the patient and that can get very confusing, even relaying that patient information to other healthcare professionals at times. So you need to make sure we're pulling out the right information, looking at it from is it a kilo or raw, 20 kilo weight plate of muscle, or is it a percentage that works? So that's why I actually really like this example. And I know, tell me about fat mass. One of the things that I'm certainly in the US and in Australia, a lot of people are very reluctant to talk about fat mass. Now, I know when we look at Kevin's results, if we go to the end result, he doesn't have a lot of fat mass, but I know a lot of your other patients would certainly have, sort of high levels of fat mass. So how do you get around that conversation where I don't want to know what my fat mass is, don't tell me, things like that?
Look at that improvement. It's fluid, guys.
Yeah.
Say that again.
Yeah, we'll just say, look
improvement in the extracellular and intracellular fluid there.
Yeah.
Before you get into fat mass.
Yeah, absolutely. He was on a very different ratio before. Look at his baseline measures, the little black line for everyone on the call. Now he's back within a pretty normal, healthy range. So there's been a lot of reduction in extracellular fluid. He's stabilized that intracellular fluid, and obviously we're now seeing that muscle mass, kind of improvement. If we go down to his fat mass, and
Adam and Brent, I know we're running short on time. After you talk about fat mass, we've had 2 questions about phase angle.
Yeah, go for it. Okay, Brent. So just tell me how you talk about fat mass. Don't talk about my fat mass. Talk about somebody else's. I don't need to know. I mean, that's kind of typically what people. That's the first thing with body composition. Oh, I don't want to know my fat mass. You know, so how do you from an exercise physiologist, you know, allied health professional, talk to someone when they're in that kind of frame of mind with body composition? Because it's really critical. You know, it completes the whole body composition picture. It's fluid, it's muscle, it's fat, it's phase angle. So just spend a couple of minutes on that, and then we'll get to the phase angle questions.
Yep. You know, fat is a fuel. I just talk about fuel. So if you get better putting water in your tank and it's getting out into the muscle, the more your muscle works, it uses more fuel. Okay, so I try to get them, and I demystify the fat straight away. Okay, saying that we need fat, we can't live without it.
Right.
But just think of it as a fuel at the moment. What your body may be doing, okay, it might be storing more fuel for later. And how about we start using it now? So again, you can tell straight away with a patient if they don't want to know their fat mass. It'll take a few sessions before you start to see it. And again, focus on fluid, focus on all the things that there is in their power or in their control, and make them part of the journey. I always say that, you know, the most important therapist in the room with you is actually you. And if we can educate you about your own body, you become that therapy team, part of that team. So like, I don't know what it is. Is it the way that I try to tell stories as I'm treating a patient rather than just giving them the numbers? I don't know, but I don't have too many where that conversation about they don't want to look at their fat. You know, in myself, I have a little competition in my own head, thinking I want that out of their vocabulary by session 4, and I'm a little bit competitive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like that. I mean, it does, you know, and I've had that conversation thousands of times, and it does take 2 or 3 or 4, you know, sessions, you know, looking at this information to really get them understanding. So it's not all about the data, and that's kind of why this session was put on it. You know, we can look at all of the numbers and the data, but ultimately, how do we kind of get that message across? And it can take a second and a third session from you to really get them buying in. You know, and I know when someone walks in with a water bottle, hey Brent, I was listening to you, I was understanding what you were saying about fluid. You know you're starting to win, you know, the battle and the competition, as you said, and if they get less concerned about weight on the scales and more interested in muscle mass and even phase angle, which we're going to talk about now, we know that we've A, got the results that you need, B, that the patient's understanding, and C, they're going to make changes that hopefully will improve their quality of life for a long time. So, you know, it can be really, really powerful used correctly. So, you know, thank you for sharing that. Joanne, what questions have you got there?
So we've got the phase angle questions, and we have a question about what does low ICF mean?
Can I, just before you answer that, Adam,
Go for it.
I've got a patient about to turn up in 30 seconds. Is there any more questions for me in case I have to duck out early rather than the phase angle stuff?
I think the phase angle is the key. We've got 2 questions there. So
beautiful. I'll leave that to Adam then.
Yeah.
Awesome. No problem. So yeah, go for it, Joanne.
What's that?
On the phase angle question?
Yeah, so would you explain it a little bit more, and how do you explain it to a client? And how do they work to change it? So what can you do to change phase angle?
Yeah, really good questions. And I think that the key is how do we explain it to a client? That's the wording. You know, I mean, it can be called a whole range of things in the research, with our technology, but ultimately, how do we use it, you know, from a patient perspective? So, you know, the quality of you know, the cell at the cellular level, quality of the health at the cellular level, they're sort of words that I would use. You know, we know it's a scale from pretty much 0 to 10. You can see where this particular patient started with their baseline at 4.1. And as things have improved with the work that Brent has done, he's moved to a 5.3. So 4.1 for him was pretty low, and he's moved into that 5.3 range. Now, phase angle, you will see improvements if they're obviously improving nutritionally, but also building muscle mass. And that intracellular fluid is also improving as well, because intracellular fluid is that, you know, the fluid inside the cell. So it's kind of the, you know, the good stuff that we want to make sure that's working really well, like muscle mass. So they're kind of all linked. You should see improvements in phase angle as things are improving. Unfortunately, we also notice that if someone is deteriorating with their cancer or their disease, phase angle will also really drop off. So it's a great marker to find out internally what's kind of happening at a cellular level, and using it as a one number or a baseline to again motivate the patients to say, hey, all the work we're doing and the nutrition changes and the exercise, it's working. Look at the phase angle improvement. And likewise, it can be a marker if something occurs as well.
Yeah, so Adam and Brent, would you say you're not doing anything unique for phase angle? It's it's all of the changes you're suggesting to improve health are going to then go ahead and impact the phase angle. Is that a fair way to interpret what you're saying?
Yeah, from my side, definitely. What do you think, Brent?
100%.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's a unique number. It's one number. It's a very important part of our body composition report. And it will improve when you're improving some of those other areas. If you're not seeing improvement in phase angle, it's worthy of further investigation. Is it a nutrition issue? Is it a compliance issue to some of the programs that are not working for that particular patient? Are they not handling the exercise potentially that Brett's giving them? All of those
Are they
things.
recurring?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why it's really useful. But I mean, you can see in this example that there's been a significant shift in phase angle, and there's smaller numbers. So I know I looked at a report the other day where there was a 1.2, 1.3 degree difference in the phase angle. That's a really significant change. So we're not trying to move someone from 4.1 to 7. Like I think, my phase angle being a little bit younger than this patient sits around 7 or 8. Now, I'm not trying to get to a 10, but I'm happy at a 7 or 8. If I was a 4, then that's a problem. Is it chronic disease? Is it illness? So knowing where the markers are and moving in the right direction, like anything, and I think, like Brent said, trend over time is the most powerful element with body composition. Trend over time allows Brent to talk to his patient on a regular basis, to educate them and get them to learn and understand about body composition. Because you'll have a goal, Brent, with your patients. You know exactly what you're trying to achieve. You're trying to get them on board with the numbers. If you see those numbers going in the right direction, like that little uptick after the little decline in skeletal muscle mass, life-changing for this particular patient, and it can happen for all the patients that we're using this data with. So
yeah, that little uptake, I went through back through all my treatment notes on the patient yesterday, and I thought, well, what was it about around start, or the week we started 6RM training. So he was lifting heavier weight, and for him, he actually talking about training to fail, so unable to do the 6th rep. Before he was doing sets of 15 to 20 because he was too scared he was going to hurt himself. So it was a really big, where his program did not change except for load. He did the same days, did the same exercises. All we did from that week, he got his confidence up, and we went from 15 to 20 RM to a 6 RM, and we saw that quality in that phase angle start to change. So again, it went back to that conversation about the steak. He's not getting a patty or a rissole anymore. He's getting a good New York steak. So it was that quality of his training, and that's where it started to go up.
Maybe a big Texas ribeye steak.
Ribeye, yeah. I dropped the New York, so I forgot how competitive they over there.
Wrong steak, mate. Wrong steak. I'll have to cancel that out. No problem. So yeah, I don't know if you had anything more to add, Joanne. I know we
no, that's wonderful. I think we touched on the questions that came through. So and we're a little bit over, but we're at 30 minutes, which is what we targeted, technical glitches. So thanks everyone for joining. Thank you, Brent, so much for joining us and sharing your case. And really, I mean, I was taking notes. Wonderful analogies for how you talk about the different aspects of body composition. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Thanks, Joanne. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day. Good evening.
Okay. Stay safe.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
Bye.